Food and Wine Insider is a weekly look at a $1.5 trillion industry touching every American. Devoted to the business of purveying food and decanting wines, Food and Wine Radio is a unique program highlighting not food recipes or wine vintages, but how to make a profit while satisfying America's palates. In this competitive but highly rewarding sector, many men and women have made profits while fulfilling a dream. Food and Wine Insider is all about better managing any business involving food and wine. Each week, your co-hosts sit down with successful restaurateurs, food mavens, winery vintners, store owners, food suppliers, and other leaders in the worldwide industry that centers on foodstuff and wine. In frank give-and-take sessions, guests and panelists talk about the business of bringing healthy and pleasurable foods and wines to others. Your Food and Wine Radio host are Ann Daw, former president of the Specialty Food Association and a longtime food executive who has held senior positions both here and abroad with Kraft Foods and Philip Morris. Don Mazzella, a nationally known business commentator. On each show, they invite leaders of the world's culinary and wine industries to share the secrets of their success. Visit us at foodandwineinsider.com.
You know, and I have a special place in my heart for any food company that's located in Minneapolis, because as you know, my wife Joanne Lang is from Minnetonka. Well, we have on the program today Sue Kakuk. She is from the Minnetonka area. She's developed a product called Kakookies, which she developed to give children a healthful alternative snack. Sue, welcome to the program.
Yes, hello, and thank you for having me.
Well, Sue, I'm going to turn it over to Ann because she apparently has sampled your products before. So, Ann, it's all yours.
Thanks, Don. And Sue, again, welcome to the program. And yes, I met you at a fancy food show, and I tried your products. You gave me a couple of samples, and I actually tried them out with my daughters, and one is a teenager and one's in her early 20s, and they love the product. So I think I'd love for you to start a little bit about what you were doing before Kakookies.
Oh, well, I actually have a degree in interior design, and my career path led me to space planning and kitchen design. So I have that creative background, and I love being in the kitchen. And then I took time off from my career to raise my family, and that's where I started getting involved a lot, just with volunteering within the community and doing recipe contests.
So what was the inspiration behind the products? I'd love you to tell that story. And I also want you to talk about the brand. This is a business that you only started just 4 years ago, so it's really very exciting.
Yeah. So I think a lot of times, you know, there's several levels to the inspiration. As I mentioned, I used to do cooking contests. I've been a Pillsbury Bake Off finalist 2 times. And that, I think, gave me kind of the confidence to try new things. That was always part of my personality, thinking outside the box. I would rarely follow a recipe. I was always trying substitutions. And so years later, when my daughter was a collegiate cyclist and I discovered that they were stopping at fast food before their races, I didn't feel really good about that, in that I wasn't convinced that that was the best nutrition that they should be having. So I simply decided, well, I'm going to send them cookies, and but I'm going to replace the white flour with whole wheat flour, and I'm going to throw in some nuts and some other grains and seeds, and just really change it up to try to get it a little bit more power-packed, but yet still be familiar as a cookie. I didn't want to change it too much. and then obviously I enjoy cooking, and I had an experience earlier on when I was cooking with my children, and we were making banana bread together. And we were having fun making banana bread, and you get a couple kids going. Sometimes maybe you lose focus of what you're doing. And after the banana bread was baked, of course, my children loved eating what they had just prepared. But I tasted it, and I thought, something is different here. And I thought back through the process, and I realized we forgot to add the sugar. But that was kind of an aha moment of, okay, one, you get children involved. They're going to like whatever they prepare for the most part. But that I could reduce the sugar in my baked goods. So that was pieces of the inspiration for developing this cookie for my daughter and her friends, was to, try changing the recipe a bit, but not too much, because if I totally took out the sugar, they didn't like it. Or if I totally, swapped everything, they just didn't like it. So it was kind of some stages of maybe a typical mom of trying to sneak in those vegetables to certain dishes. I was doing the same thing with this cookie development.
So the name of the product is Kakookies, and I want you to talk a little bit about the brand. Did you come up with the name, or did somebody else come up with the name? Where did it come from? I'm assuming it's a play on your last name, but please explain.
It is a play on our last name. And so my last name is Kakuk, or Kakuk, and named our brand Kakookies. When I first started baking the cookies, I was just calling them Sue's breakfast cookies, because that's kind of how it started. It was a cookie that you could have for breakfast, because it was made with oats and nuts and seeds. So I just said, Sue's breakfast cookie just doesn't quite sound right. And we thought about things for a while, but it really was one of those moments where I woke up in the morning and it's like, I have it. It's Kakookies. And it has stuck ever since. And it is really fun to be at an event or at a trade show, and people see the name Kakookies. They just automatically want to express it and say, Kakookies. Oh, Kakookies. So we're really pleased that there is a connection with our name, and as well as the product itself.
Now, your products are certified gluten-free. They have 4 to 5 grams of plant-based proteins. Was that by accident, or were you really intending to create something that had this sort of sustained energy and a good source of fiber? You did talk about your daughter being a cyclist. I'm just curious as to how you built not only the concept, but the product and the ingredients that would sort of fulfill the concept.
Yeah. Well, the original intent was to make a healthier cookie that had some nutritional benefit. Every ingredient kind of had a purpose. And there was several years when my husband and I were hosting athletic teams. It was kind of our pay it forward to while our daughter was cycling, that we opened our home and hosted a bunch of cyclists. And part of my position was I felt obligated to feed these cyclists, not only with cookies, but also with meals. But there were a few cyclists that were following specific diets. One happened to be gluten-free, and another one had a dairy and egg allergy. So I just decided, my background is recipe development, and I like being challenged. So I kind of took my original recipe, and to make it gluten-free, I simply swapped my whole wheat flour with a gluten-free flour mix. And it worked pretty well. They liked it, and kind of same thing to make the cookie egg and dairy free. I just purchased the powdered egg replacement and some margarine replacement. And, it was okay, but I started thinking about it and reading the labels of some of these replacements, the flour or the powdered egg, and I just realized, is this really where I want to go with making this cookie healthier? It was serving a need to make it appropriate for somebody that was following a gluten-free diet or a vegan diet, but was it really making my cookie more nutritional and cleaner label? And I didn't believe that it was. That was kind of a moment where I decided, my original intent was to just have a healthier cookie, not so much to make it gluten-free or to make it vegan, but I wanted it healthier. But I think I can make it healthy and gluten-free and vegan. So I just kind of took out the flour per se, and so our cookies are all oat-based cookies. Several of them have nuts, and I don't use any powdered egg replacements or the margarine. We use coconut oil. We use chia seeds, half the amount of sugar. So I think you have to go through certain stages occasionally to recognize, okay, what do I really want this brand to be? And it brought me back to why did I start developing this cookie in the first place? It was not just to meet somebody's desire for a particular diet. It was, I really wanted it to be packed with nutrition so that it could satisfy your hunger and sustain your energy.
Mm-hmm. And so with all that complexity, what was the hardest thing to get right in developing the product or the packaging for you?
Well, the rest, I think I was just lucky. And again, a lot of that goes back to just experience. I wasn't afraid to try new things. I wasn't afraid to make certain assumptions. So the recipe was always quite good. I initially started the cookie by, so we have 4 flavors now: almond cranberry, Boundary Waters blueberry, cashew blondie, and a dark chocolate cranberry. So initially, the almond cranberry cookie, I put a whole almond, pressed it into the middle of each cookie. And it looked beautiful, but part of that, and same thing with the cashew blondie. I put a cashew nut right there in the middle of each cookie. Because I recognize some people have nut allergies, and even though I named each flavor with the nut as being the first word, almond cranberry or cashew blondie, I still felt it was important to put that nut right there in the middle so that visually somebody could see, oh, this has nuts in it. The problem with that was, as we started developing the cookie more, there was 2 issues with that. One was it's labor intensive to press that nut into each cookie. And then the second is because our cookies are all prepackaged. They're an individual cookie. They're just a little under a 2-ounce cookie, and they're approximately 200 calories. So it's kind of this single-serve mini meal replacement. And because it's prepackaged, we have to put the ounce weight or the gram weight on each cookie package, and that's all pre-printed. Well, there was a lot of variability, especially with the cashews. Sometimes it would be a whole cashew or a cashew piece, and it was actually changing our finished product weight. So that was, just maybe a small struggle. But in the end, it has really helped to, I think, have a better cookie in the long run.
Now, do you self-manufacture or do you have it contract packed?
I contract out, yes.
Okay, so that's, and the shelf life?
Our shelf life is 6 months now.
Okay.
Yes.
And I believe I'm sorry, I believe your retail line, is that for a single cookie?
Could you ask that question again, please?
Sorry, I think your retail price is $2.99 a cookie. Is that correct?
It varies between retailers. We work with the grocery retailers, bigger chains, smaller chains, food co-ops, food service. So it's more of a range between $1.99 and $2.99.
Okay. And how did you go to market? How did you choose who you were going to go to first with your product?
Yeah. Well, when we first started the business, I was not sure that I really wanted to go into grocery. My mind had always been healthy grab and go, a better for you cookie where people need it most. And that was, coffee shops or convenience stores or ski resorts, golf resorts, a lot of those places where you were buying grab and go food, but maybe you no longer wanted to have that candy bar or the high calorie muffin. So that's where my thoughts were when we first started the business. And I never did farmers markets, but we did do some athletic events. And we also opened up our website. So it was actually at a couple of the athletic events that we met some people. Maybe it was a grocery manager to a small food co-op, saw our product, recognized that it would be a good fit for their food co-op, or maybe they were a coffee shop owner. And so we just gradually started working in those channels and opening up those accounts. And so just really grew more organically. We are in we're actually in Whole Foods, which I think is a really good fit for our brand. But other than that, our strength really is the food service and grab-and-go specialty.
So do you find, where did the retailers place you, and what were some of their, were they willingly embracing your product, or how did you sell it to them? How did you explain to them what your product was and why it was better and where it should be placed in the store?
Well, that is a challenge occasionally. Many stores were looking for a gluten-free product, and so we happen to be in the gluten-free section of those stores. Others, it is strictly more of a check lane placement. But there certainly is a challenge with some of the larger chains where they might have limited shelf space, and so sometimes you just get put wherever they have the shelf space, and it may not be the correct category. For example, because our cookies are a single-serve cookie, we really don't belong in the cookie aisle, because most people go to, and this would be in a traditional grocery, because most of the cookie aisles are full of multi-packs, the Oreo packages and the Chips Ahoy kind of packages, not a single-serve cookie. So there's lots of different places that we can go, and it is challenging to occasionally sell that particular buyer into a particular placement. But that's where if it is a coffee shop, it's just the perfect place where they can walk right in, get a cup of coffee. and have the option of purchasing a fresh baked bakery goods or something that has a little bit more nutritional value that's packaged for grab and go at a later moment.
I have lots more questions, but Don, I wanted to know if you had a question.
I do, Ann. I'm listening to this fascinating conversation. Who do you have in the business? Do you have your family in the business?
Yeah, we have. So I originally, I'm the recipe creator, and we kind of took our time starting the business just to see, okay, is this something that there really is a market for, and how are we going to scale up? So it, first of all, started with myself. And after about a year and a half, we realized, okay, this is getting kind of busy. I'm getting overwhelmed and need to have additional help. So my husband, who is an engineer by trade, he quit his full-time job and started working for me full-time. And then our daughter, who she is a physical therapist now, but she's closely involved with the business because this was from day one, sending cookies off to her while she was in college. She now takes care of our marketing and social media part-time because she's still working full-time as a physical therapist. And then we just hired on a VP of sales. So there's four of us.
Well, I'm going to ask one more question and turn it back to Ann. But my question is, how do you and your husband divide up the decision making, and who makes the final decision?
Well, in a way, it's kind of easy. We've been married for 37 years, so we know each other quite well. And I know some people wonder how can husband and wife work together, but that's really how we can, because we've been married. We know each other's strengths and each other's weaknesses. So it comes easy for that part. I do most of the, as I say, the recipe development and the strategies, the marketing, the sales. And my husband is operations. That's what he does well. He loves designing the pallets. What size should the box be? Because then we can fit so many boxes and utilize the full use of the pallet and the weights. And so he's really the operations side, and it really is a wonderful complement to our business.
Well, and one more question came to mind. How did you develop the design for your products? The packaging, etc.
Well, I was actually fortunate when the very early stages. I knew that our name it's a really appropriate name for our brand, Kakookies, and needed something that represented, I guess, who we wanted to be. And I had a friend that had just started her own business. It was in a different field, and I really liked her design, her logo, her imaging, and so it was her brother that had done the design. So from day one, we reached out to a graphic designer to get our logo, and did some of our first packaging. And from there, we've just evolved, and things just kind of seem to come natural. I do a lot, my husband and I do a lot of input to direct the graphic designer to, get the final product.
Back to you, Ann.
Thanks, Don. Sue, you're very proud to be a woman-owned business. What do you do to inspire other women entrepreneurs?
Well, we have a large network here of local food producers as well as women in the food community. So I'm actively involved in several of those organizations, and I just find it natural to reach out to anybody or to mentor anyone that seems to kind of want to know my story. I don't always know. I'm always careful of advising people, and I guess the one bit of advice that I do give is, ask for advice, listen to the advice, but only follow the advice that you feel is appropriate. Sometimes people, and I was, this happened to me a couple times. I wanted help from other people. They gave me advice, and I maybe listened to it too closely, and it maybe was not the right advice for my business. So it's simply, I love to encourage other women-owned businesses, and I think if as long as we're willing to share and help, we're going to succeed.
I think that's terrific, because I was going to ask, my follow-up question was what was your advice you would give to any other woman, or for that matter, any entrepreneur? And I think you've answered the question. Just a really couple more questions, because I think we're running out of time. Is there anything you would do differently now because you've had this experience, that you've kind of learned a few things and say, wow, if I had to do this over again, I would do this?
That's always a good question, and I've thought about it before. There are many times where, I've said, oh my gosh, I had no idea it was going to be like this. And people will tell you, you start your own business, it's hard work, and these things will happen and those things will happen. You really don't believe it until you're there. I think some of the things that have I've been fortunate with is because I started this business later in life, that I'm maybe a little bit more prepared, or I feel prepared. Let's put it that way. I don't want to compare myself to somebody else, but I feel more prepared to find solutions to any obstacle that we might come across. And I'm not always surprised when things go wrong or when things happen in our favor. I've often wondered, what would I do differently? I don't know that I could do much differently, because we all learn from experience, and we learn from mistakes, and we learn from the things that we did right. And if I could do something differently, I guess it all has to happen in its own natural path. Maybe it would be to, I think if I were to start another business, I would know more, but you really can't learn unless you've been there.
Well, thank you, Sue. I think we have to wrap up our conversation today, though I could go on for a lot longer time with you. I really appreciate your time. Don, I'm going to turn it to you.
I agree with you. Sue, you've been an absolutely wonderful guest. Your website where people can reach you?
Yes, our website is Kakookies.com, and that is spelled KAKOOKIES.com.
Okay. We've been talking with Sue Kakuk. A link to her website will be on Food and Wine Insider tonight, where you can hear this program and every other past and future program. And also, at this time, you can tell us what you think by taking a brief survey and giving us your feedback. Sue, thank you so much for being with us.
Yes, and thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
To be successful, most restaurant owners require extra capital from time to time. When you need funding to renovate, buy equipment, or manage cash flow, you don't have time to track down financial statements or wait weeks for a decision. That's where Cabbage can help. Cabbage gives small businesses access to a line of credit of up to $200,000. Apply online and you'll get a decision right away. Since Cabbage is a line of credit, you can take the exact amount you need. You never have to reapply to take additional loans, and you'll only pay for the funds you use. Cabbage has helped more than 230,000 businesses from every industry, and with $4 billion in funding, Cabbage is A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau and was named the Forbes Top 100 Companies twice in a row. Check out Cabbage at cabbageWithAK.com/food and wine, and you'll get a $50 gift card when you qualify. That's KABBAGE.com/food and wine.
Line of credit is subject to credit approval. See terms and conditions. All Cabbage business loans are issued by Celtic Bank, a Utah chartered industrial bank, member FDIC.
You are listening to Ann Daw and Don Mazzella, and the program is Food and Wine Insider. Contact us at foodandwineinsider.com. Insider.
And the recent British royal wedding made much ado about serving natural, organic wines. Here from Italy to talk about natural, organic, biodynamic wines is Eleanor Shannon. She's a recognized expert in the field. And Eleanor, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Don. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, as we start, many of our guests, tell us a little bit about your fascinating background.
Well, I came to Italy in 2004. Before that, I a long time ago, had been a French literature and language major in college and at Dartmouth, and I had worked in the World Bank in Africa, so I had a lot of wanderlust and spent a lot of time in Hanover, New Hampshire, raising children and being very settled. And in 2004, I was asked to come and teach university students in a special honors program in Milan. And once I was in Milan, I started discovering not only Italian language and culture, but Italian wine, which is so connected to almost every aspect of life in Italy, culture, history. I was a double major in European history, and my children always used to complain about me taking them on history vacations. So wine was kind of at the intersection of so many aspects: geography, history, culture in Italy. And also at that point in time, I was going through sort of personal turbulence, getting divorced, and I was doing a lot of yoga and meditation, and I was getting more into sort of this whole idea of experience of the senses, of sitting down to breathe and live in the moment, quote unquote. And so wine was sort of also at that intersection in my life. I started getting fascinated with just sitting quietly and seeing what could I smell or taste or notice in life in general, and then more specifically in wine. So at the end of 4 years of teaching, when I had actually already been divorced, I decided to take the official professional wine sommelier training course, the Associazione Italiana Sommelier, which is a 3-part training, and you take a test at the end of each part and then a final test at the end. That's first a written exam, and then if you qualify, you take an oral exam where you have to stand in front of someone and present a wine and do a blind tasting and this sort of thing. So once I had passed through all of those hoops, I embarked on learning really about wine in a much more concrete and sort of personal way by traveling around to visit wine people. So that's how I got started.
Well, after that start, I'm going to now turn to Anne.
Thank you, Don. I would love to know a little bit more about Italy and how it intersects with all the things you just talked about. You talked about wine, obviously, and you've talked about yoga, and you've talked about the senses. There's something about Italy that brings the best out of all of those things. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think, as I say to people, you know, when you grow up in America, you learn to, you know, to kind of live on a super interstate highway. Like everything moves fast and efficiently, and you go in a straight line from A to B. And in Italy, you know, it's sort of more like a country road. You know, things are always on the curve, and sometimes it can actually be very frustrating because, as an American person, you kind of think, well, wait a minute. We're going A to B, and someone just told me that, and it's not working out that way. But because things are so much more sort of slowed down and, in a sense, less efficient, people move at a slower pace. And there's, you know, things close in my little village from sort of 12:30 until 3:30 or 4 because people still go home and have lunch with their families. And there's so many, you know, public offices close, the place where I go to do all my immigration things, or the doctor's office, or it's just a different mentality. And then you're surrounded by, still so much of Italy is rural, and there is the way people eat tends to be so tied to the seasons and to noticing what they call piacere, the pleasure of experiences, whether it's sitting to have a coffee with someone or sipping a glass of wine or just taking a walk in the fields or in the woods. There's so much sort of sensuality and sensoriality in daily life here, partly because it's just a whole different culture and mentality that really goes back so far in time. I mean, once I began realizing, I was traveling in Sicily, and I went to a little island called Mozia where the Phoenicians made wine since, you know, something like 700 BC. And you're thinking, wow, this is like a really old way of thinking and doing things. And
you know,
yeah?
No, I was going to say, having been to Italy, the thing I was always most impressed by is you would just stop at any point in time and have a cafe, you know, and there were all these little coffee shops, and it just was, I think you've said it, you know, it's this sense of pace and this sense of really taking in the environment, taking in it, and how you sort of feel in that environment. And I think that's the beauty of Italy, and the fact that it's still so unspoiled is pretty amazing. Yeah, I've read several of your articles, which, by the way, I found fascinating. It's clear that you have been a teacher, because it comes through in these articles. But I think what you just talked about in terms of Italy and one's relationship to it, how that fits with having you talk about what does it mean to be natural versus organic versus biodiverse in wine? What do these designations really mean?
That is such a great question. I think if you step back from those exact labels and think in a more general way, in my experience, there are two kinds of wine. There's wine that has been made in a sense with an objective in mind, with a goal in mind, that says we're going to move from point A to point B, and that kind of more American mentality that's efficient and clear, that says, you know, I basically want at the end of this process for my wine to have certain characteristics. And there are companies now that send out little tasting tubes to people, and you can send back and say, I really like the following tubes most, and they're like, okay, we'll find you wines that meet that taste best. And then if you take it at the far other end of the extreme and you say, okay, there's another kind of wine that comes from somebody who for centuries and generations has made wine in a certain place, and there's a very distinctive type of soil and a very certain native grape variety that comes from that place. And without any preconceived notion of how it's going to turn out, I'm going to make wine in this particular vintage year, given the grapes that come into my cellar, and I'm going to do as little as I possibly can so that those grapes and that wine will end up having a very distinctive personality. And I don't know exactly what it's going to be when it comes out, but it's going to be representative of this place and these grapes and the people who are making the wine in this point in time. So, that's really, if you think of it, culturally, an Italian mentality way of doing things. And the wine industry has moved very, very strongly toward the first kind of, like, I want my wine to get at least a 90 plus on a Parker score or, Wine Spectator or any number of point score things. Because in 1976, when there was the famous Judgment of Paris, where there was a blind tasting with the French judges that noticed California wines and actually gave these top scores to California wines, there came to be an idea that you could have an absolute score, that an expert could give you an absolute score on a wine. And then that was followed in the early 80s by Robert Parker thinking, I know what every American knows what 100 is on a spelling test. So if I rate these wines, then these French wines, because at the time he was really dealing with Bordeaux wines, I don't have to worry about, going to a dinner party and Chateau blah, blah, blah. I know that Robert Parker told me it was a 93, so I'm not going to be embarrassed and I'll be able to bring a good wine to the dinner party. So the point score and the blind tasting idea really drove producers to try to come up with taste that matched what you needed for that particular palate, which is a very, actually more of an American palate, which is an international palate that wants a rounder, bigger wine taste. And so even in Italy, people started putting their wine in barrique or doing different processes in the cellar with chemicals that you could create. You could actually construct a wine that scientifically with chemicals that would meet these point scores. And actually, for economic reasons, people who living on the edge trying to be a farmer, they're like, I got to make money in some way. So it made sense to follow that. And I think what's happening now is that there's a reaction to the standardization and homogenization of taste, and people don't necessarily want every wine to taste like a Robert Parker Cabernet. And so the natural, organic, biodynamic movement is kind of twofold in the sense, one is you're not putting sulfites and heavy sulfites and lots of chemicals from the vineyard or the cellar in your body, but also you're getting a wine that is more true to where it comes from, and it's more fun and interesting to taste things that come from different terroirs that haven't been purposefully homogenized to meet a marketing segment.
Well, interesting. So when you talk about biodynamic, what are you talking about in terms of wine?
Well, biodynamic is a certain way of producing. It's really an agricultural system that was developed in the 1920s. It wasn't even developed, it was described by Rudolf Steiner in the 1920s as a reaction really to the creation of nitrogen fertilizers, which nitrogen fertilizers came out of World War I. And the idea is you put these nitrogen fertilizers on your crops and they're going to grow really fast. And so people were beginning to do that. And Rudolf Steiner said, if you toss those fertilizers into the earth, you're basically going to kill the soil. And he said that's, the soil is what we depend on for life on earth. So he described a way of, instead of killing the microorganisms in the soil, to encourage the microorganisms in the soil according to a series of treatments. And the most famous one you heard talked about is burying manure in a cow horn in November, and then in the spring you take it out, and the humus that's in there is called the 500, and you mix that in a double vortex with water and spray it on the vines and on the and on the earth, and it encourages microorganisms to grow in the soil, which in turn strengthens the plant, which in turn creates better fruit, and you don't have to then put all sorts of insecticides and things in the vineyard. But really, aside from that very simple first level kind of description of biodynamic, it's really a much more of a holistic view where you view the vine as part of the farm, as part of the community, as part of the earth, as part of the cosmos. And so you also pay attention to the cycles of the moon and things that some people make fun of, but actually a lot of what's in biodynamic farming is what's called in Italy the wisdom of the contadino, like the wisdom of the peasant farmer for generations, who knows that you can't plant every year the same thing in the same field or it exhausts the soil. If you put fava beans planted down your vineyard and then you cut the plants and allow the plants to make compost that's called green compost, then that will enrich the soil and give you better fruit. So a lot of it is a lot of what's encoded in biodynamic agriculture is sort of common wisdom, traditional wisdom of farming. And it's a form of agriculture that then, it's similar in a sense to organic, but organic basically says you just can't use any chemicals in the vineyard, except you can put sulfur to stop mold, different kinds of mold, and you can put copper, which also goes against certain kinds of diseases that can happen in the vineyard. And increasingly natural and biodynamic producers are trying to use less sulfur and copper, because copper is a metal that doesn't leave the soil. Like if you keep on putting copper, it stays. And so they're looking for alternatives. So a lot of what you see is, whereas organic was sort of the first thing out of the block in terms of people saying, what can we get certified? Now you see people doing lots of experimenting and going back to very traditional methods to avoid even putting copper and sulfur in the vineyards.
So I guess what's at the heart of really good wine is great terroir. I think it's all about, the soil. You were talking about what we used to call in the States as, we alternate planting of different crop rotation so that the soil doesn't get tired. Because if you're growing the same thing in the soil all the time, at some point the nutrients the soil get depleted. So when we think about terroir, because people have used that word a lot, how would you describe it? And I'm not quite sure properly necessarily. How would you explain it to folks in terms of what that means?
Well, it starts out with the basic natural components of the place. So what kind of soil do you have? And that in Italy, wine that comes from any kind of soil that has more limestone or volcanic soil always creates elegance in the wine. And there's a lot of parts of Italy that have been under the sea, and there are lots of volcanic parts of Italy. So you have amazing soil terroir here. Then you also have, the fact that what is the climate? The climate is part of the terroir. How warm does it get? How much sun do you get? How much rain do you get? And the climate in Italy is just about ideal. You also have microclimates, like on top of Mount Etna, where it's horridly hot in Sicily, but up on top of, or on the slopes of Mount Etna, for example, it will be cooler. So you can get these very elegant wines that come from volcanic soil that get lots of sun, but it doesn't get too hot. So you're always at an intersection. I once went to a terroir conference where people try to make these models of exactly what creates the best wine in terms of these natural components, but no one's really been able to ever come up with an exact SCADA because I always say it's kind of like how people fall in love. There are certain parts of it that are rational, and there are certain parts of it that really can't be explained. And I do love that mystery of the terroir. Certain things you can't actually explain. And so there's first that component, and then there's the second component, which is how does the wine grower, what grape variety does he or she plant, when do they harvest, what kind of pruning do they do? So there are decisions that the wine grower makes that sort of become part of the terroir, because it's often based on generations of learning for, like, well, if we're here by the sea where there's all the saltiness in the air, this type of grape variety does best. And, you know, we would like a nice fresh wine to go with our fish, so we're going to harvest early and have a lot of acidity in the grapes. So terroir is a combination of natural factors and then sort of the people factor of how that person decides to make the wine.
So you introduce some people on custom trips to Italy and to wine, but you have a certain passion for all things Italian, and you talk a little bit about the feminine, the intuitive, the creative aspects of making natural wine, but how you connect that with olive oil, the bread making, the cheese making. Talk a little bit about that, because it's sort of an experience, a total experience that you are seeking, and that you've had the opportunity to introduce other people to, or plan to. Talk a little bit about that.
Okay, sure. Well, if you think about, like, we as American people, how we think of a bottle of wine, and I know before I came to Italy, I thought of a bottle of wine this way. It's like something you sort of pull out and you just pour by itself to have a glass of wine at the cocktail hour, or someone takes it in a blind tasting and makes a point score. So it's kind of a thing that exists on its own, just like I don't know, like a glass of beer, or like a hat you buy at the shop. But in Italy, wine is a part of this whole culture that you're talking about. So wine doesn't ever exist really on its own in Italy. It's always served at the table. It's always served with some kind of food, and the food is often like bread or cheese or olive oil or things that are local. So one of the things I find most fascinating, people say to me, "What's your favorite wine?" And I say, well, it's really impossible to say, because it depends on the season, and it depends on whom I'm with, and it depends on what I'm eating. So, you know, because everything in Italy sort of is in this much more holistic concept of food being at the center, food/wine being at the center of all kind of social experiences that you have. I don't know what last year some friends of mine said, oh, we found out about this group of people who are going for a hike under the full moon, and we're going to leave at 7 p.m. and get back at midnight. And I guess I've gotten more Italian, because I said, oh my gosh, well, are we supposed to eat dinner before? And they said, no, just bring 10 euros because we're going to stop along the way for a picnic. And it turned out we hiked for about 2 hours, I think, until 9 o'clock, when the sun was just going down. And we ended up at a farmhouse where there was this huge meal for 10 euros. There was a band playing, and we had, you know, the aperitivo, and then we had pasta, and then there was meat on the grill. And the whole thing ended at, it was something like 11, and then we walked back to the cars, and I said, I don't know if that was a hike with dinner or dinner with a hike, but
that's awesome.
The food and wine as a cultural experience was part of the thing, and it just goes back so far in Italian history, because wine was, for the contadino, or the person working the land, was like the wine at the meals was safer than drinking water, and it was kind of a morale booster. And then in terms of like religion, it was considered divine, because nobody understood how fermentation happened or why the wine made you drunk. And then it was a symbol of prestige and wealth amongst the kings or the noblemen. So wine is sort of inserted at every level of culture here, and it never exists on its own as a thing by itself. And I love the fact that it's led me into these other things, like cooking, which I was never good at, but have become better at because I can't possibly live here without learning how to cook.
I really do want to ask you, I guess one of them, because I have only one question I can ask you, is what have been some of the biggest learnings to date that you've taken from your adventures?
Well, I have definitely moved into a much more intuitive side of myself. Previously, I was an academic person, and I really relied always on, like, I wanted to know the rational answer, and I wanted to do everything A to B to C to D and sort of have everything under control. And I think the biggest switch for me has been learning to go with the flow and knowing that things aren't, I don't know how things are going to turn out, just like these winemakers don't necessarily know. There's certain things, yes, that I still do rationally when I go to write an article or something, but I have found so much more joy and sort of fun and discovery in my life by leaving things to flow and to trusting my intuition more, to say, well, how does this feel? Do I really want to do this, or do I not want to do that? Or as opposed to like deciding everything with my sort of more rational, intellectual side. And I think that's how these people make their wine, is they do, test things scientifically, and they have to think things through rationally and, pack the wine to send it and so forth. But there's a lot more women who make, percentage-wise, who are in this sort of natural way of making wine. And even the men who are in it have said to me, look, I have to do this on my feminine side because I have to accompany the wine, and I have to receive, and I have to be in a place of much more intuition and sort of watching how things go. I can't demand that the wine go in a certain way or force it. Well, you could, then it would be conventional wine, made in a factory.
All right. Well, I have so many more questions to ask you, but we have no time. But I love that the name of your organization is Uncorked. But I'm going to turn it to Dawn, so we're making sure that people know about your website and how to get in touch with you and learn more about the true pleasure of wine.
Thank you so much for this beautiful interview. I feel really fortunate.
Oh, but before you go, Eleanor, your website again?
Is uncorkedinitaly.com. Uncorked, UNCORKEDINITALY. Uncorked in Italy.
Well, we're going to put a link to your website on foodandwineinsider.com tonight. You can also hear all of our past and future programs on foodandwineinsider.com. Eleanor Shannon, we thank you so much for being with us.
I loved it. Thank you.
To be successful, most restaurant owners require extra capital from time to time. When you need funding to renovate, buy equipment, or manage cash flow, you don't have time to track down financial statements or wait weeks for a decision. That's where Kabbage can help. Kabbage gives small businesses access to a line of credit of up to $200,000. Apply online and you'll get a decision right away. Since Kabbage is a line of credit, you can take the exact amount you need. You never have to reapply to take additional loans, and you'll only pay for the funds you use. Kabbage has helped more than 230,000 businesses from every industry, and with $4 billion in funding, Kabbage is A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau and was named the Forbes Top 100 Companies twice in a row. Check out Kabbage at kabbagewithak.com/foodandwine, and you'll get a $50 gift card when you qualify. That's KABBAGE.com/foodandwine.
Line of credit is subject to credit approval. See terms and conditions. All Cabbage business loans are issued by Celtic Bank, a Utah chartered industrial bank, member FDIC.
You've been listening to Food and Wine Insider with Ann Daw and Don Mazzella. Want to join us on a future show? Contact us at foodandwineinsider.com. Until next time, have a passion for food, wine, and profits, and think of our program, Food and Wine Insider.